The story begins with a man named Teddy. Actually, Teddy was one of the best boxers in Poland, but when Germany invaded Poland during World War II, Hitler's forces captured Teddy and imprisoned him in a concentration camp. The rest of those who were trapped here with Teddy are made to work like donkeys. They are not allowed to rest, they are made to sleep on the floor, where many sleep together like ants. And for food they are given only a little water, which is dirt, and drinking this dirty water makes their body more sick, so they can't work well. There was also a 15-year-old named Generic who was beaten by everyone in prison, and an old man who planned to escape, but when a guard overheard his plan, he killed him on the spot with a blow to his head. A few days later, Teddy is assigned to clean a German officer's house, and on this occasion he steals some apples and brings one to Generic to eat, but Generic gives the apple to an old man, and Teddy is a little shocked by this. But he gives him another apple, but then some German army came because they found out about the apple theft, and since the apple was found with all three people, they captured all three people in a field where all were punished. The old man is told to put the apple on his head, and when he does, the officer shoots him in the head instead of shooting at the apple, then asks Teddy to put the apple on his head too. But Teddy gets very brave and starts eating the apple in front of them, and seeing this everyone is shocked and an officer impress on him, so he doesn't do anything to him, but he doesn't let go of that kid. He decides to give him a severe punishment. Although he was being beaten right in front of Teddy, Teddy felt bad, but there was nothing he could do, because he couldn't do anything even if he wanted to, and at night he regrets seeing Generic because it happened because of his theft. In the morning some German armies put some children and women in a gas chamber, and then they all died there by gassing the chamber from above. As days went by they were subjected to more and more torture, they were not given food, they were made to do more work and they were beaten. One day an officer eats bread and drops a piece of bread on the ground, and everyone rushes for this bread, because everyone is hungry, so an idea comes to the officer's head. He thinks he will start a competition, and whoever wins there will give a loaf of bread, and thus the competition will move forward and maybe everyone will get food. Then he calls two and tells one to slap the other. When the first slaps nothing happens, but when the second slaps the first falls, so the second gets the bread. And after a few rounds of play they bring Teddy here, but since Teddy is a boxing champion, his opponent cannot slap him, so Teddy defeats him easily, and after seeing this everyone here is happy, but this officer is not happy. But then another officer comes along who is also a boxer, so he offers Teddy a fight with him, and Teddy accepts the offer. When they then fight, the officer repeatedly tries to attack Teddy, but Teddy repeatedly tries to save himself by not attacking the officer, and a little later when Teddy gets a chance, he counters him with a hard punch in the face, although he punches a little hard, but the officer is happy, because they are both boxers, so this officer gives him a huge loaf of bread. But Teddy doesn't eat this bread alone, he shares it with everyone, but then he notices that Generic is breathing very heavily, because he is working so hard and he is getting less food and sleep, so he is slowly getting sick, and as his health gradually worsens, he also has the effects of pneumonia, so Teddy thinks it might do him some good, if he can talk to the officer and get some medicine for him, so he goes and talks to the officer and luckily the officer agrees, but he says, "You have to do some work for me too." After some time, the officer brought him in front of some senior officers and told about his boxing talent. Actually this officer wanted to start a competition with all the boxers in the jail, so that they all could be entertained. At first the officers think how a thin man like Teddy can be a boxer, but since he was repeatedly requesting them, they gave permission. Then the day comes for the first match. Teddy is asked to fight a fighter, and when the fight starts, the fighter tries to attack Teddy repeatedly, but Teddy doesn't attack him. But when the second round of fight started, Teddy started to attack him, and his skill was so good that he beat the fighter very easily, so the German army becomes obsessed with him and becomes his fan. Moreover the German commander's son likes him because he is a very good fighter, and because he wins he is given lots of bread, and he is put in charge of the horse stable. But then he comes to the hospital to have his injuries treated, and when the nurse treats him he asks her for pneumonia medicine, and the nurse also gives him medicine. He then comes to the patient room, he can see many people lying there like dead, but he goes to the Generic and gives him some medicine and leaves the rest to the nurse. Since Teddy works at the horse stable, he also gets some free time, so he starts practicing. He practices boxing to make himself more powerful, and after a few days when Generic also recovers, he gets him a job at the hospital. Here Generic meets a nurse named Helsia, they start to like each other and fall in love with each other. Now even though Teddy was winning matches over and over again, and getting good food and eating them, he was recovering, but everyone else was faring worse, being tortured, put to death in gas chambers, and they were shot dead for even the smallest mistake, so they were always in fear. Also there was a shortage of food in the places where the patients were kept in the hospital, so their bodies were slowly weakening, so Teddy was very upset, so he started fighting with his mind. He would fight with his best against whoever he was allowed to fight, and he would share the food he got without eating it alone, so that everyone could eat good food and get well, and he would secretly steal medicine together with the nurse and give it to the patients, so that they would not die for lack of medicine. A few days later, the German army brought a terrible fighter from another prison to fight Teddy, and they thought maybe this time Teddy would lose, because this fighter was too strong, and Teddy was a thin man. But when the fight started, this fighter tried repeatedly to attack Teddy but could not beat him. Teddy was saving himself, and when Teddy got the chance to attack him, this fighter could not bear it and fell to the ground, and after winning this fight, Teddy is given many loaves of bread. But also this time he doesn't eat the loaves alone. He distributes them among everyone. Later that night, some prisoners were being put into the gas chamber. There was a girl named Helchia, because she was caught stealing food, but before entering the chamber, an army took her at gunpoint and asked her to take off her clothes, but she didn't want to take off, and she cleverly took his gun and shot him dead. But after seeing this, the rest of the army started shooting at her and killed her there, and many more died here because of these shots. And standing far away watching them, Generic, he couldn't bear them, he became very emotional losing Helchia. The general also gets hit in his hand during these shootings, so he comes to the hospital to get treatment. But he sees that the Generic is working as a nurse without any training, so he gets very angry and takes him to jail and punished for that. And the next morning when Teddy finds out about it, he goes and starts talking to the German officers, but they don't want to talk to him. So Teddy tells them, I'm willing to fight the best fighter in Germany for the release of Generic. But after hearing this everyone starts laughing, but Teddy threatens them that, if they don't accept this condition then he will never take part in any fight again. So the officer agreed to accept his condition after thinking a little, but the officers have already planned a plan to defeat Teddy, so that Teddy can't win in any way. Later in the evening when the fight started, Teddy could not keep up with this fighter, because he is such a terrible fighter. Teddy tried to save himself repeatedly, but he couldn't, and he lost the first round of the fight. But at the beginning of the second round Teddy was back to his true form. He was attacking him again and again, and he couldn't stand them. But when the officials could see that their fighter was losing, they signaled to the referee to stop the fight, and during the break, Teddy is fed poisoned water, the effects of which begin on him at the start of the third round, and he takes this opportunity to punch Teddy hard, causing Teddy to fall to the ground, so the officers declare him the winner. But after a while Teddy gets back up and says, this fight should still go on because I haven't given up yet. But then the officers bring Generic in front of him, and Teddy calms down after seeing Generic. But he can see a lot of bruises on his body, he's been beaten a lot. The officers tell Teddy to fight Generic. They say if you don't fight him he will be shot dead now, but Teddy doesn't want to fight him, because he doesn't want to hurt him more, so an army shoots Generic from behind, and upon seeing his dead body, Teddy begins to cry, and because Teddy didn't obey their order, he was hanged from a pole. He was hung like that all night. In the morning he was told to work, but Teddy didn't work and came to where all the corpses were being burned. He tries to find Generic's body here, but he doesn't find it. He finds one of his toys here, and he gets more emotional when he finds it, but then a sudden power comes over him. He thinks he will lose the fighter at any cost and avenge this death, so he comes into the boxing ring and he challenges him saying, I want to fight you now. So this fight also accepts his challenge, because he knows he can knock Teddy out easily. But there was another prison warden present. He had arrested Teddy, so he knew what a fighter Teddy was, so he started betting on Teddy's side. Then when the fight started, the fighter tried to attack Teddy repeatedly, but he couldn't hit him, because Teddy was saving himself with his technique. Even though he was bleeding from his nose and mouth, he didn't give up, and when Teddy gets a chance, Teddy starts to attack him, and the fighter's condition worsens due to repeated punches. Blood starts to come out of his mouth, and when he falls to the ground unable to bear the pain, Teddy wins the fight, causing all the inmates to chant his name. Later we are told that Teddy still had many fights. He always won the fights, but the elite force defeats the Germans and frees them, and when Teddy comes home he starts teaching the kids to boxing, and that's where the story ends.